Hello, everybody. I'm Michael Smith. Welcome to the Lowdown. Today, joining me, special guest, general partner of Balerian Space Ventures, is Daniel Kleinmann. Daniel, how are you doing?
I'm good, Michael. How you doing?
Oh,
Thanks for
doing
having me.
great. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny. I went back to see and listen to our old episode. Can you believe it's been well past 2 years now, and around 3 years since I met you guys?
It's crazy. It feels like 20 years.
Well, I can tell you, yeah, absolutely. It feels like, as far as what's happened since then, feels like decades, doesn't it? And that's probably the amazing thing, and why we're doing this podcast is that, there's so much that's happening so fast. I mean, it's so hard for anyone just to keep up with anymore. But that's why I wanted to bring you on, talk a little bit about what's happened since then, and for anyone that needs to be caught up, we got the episode on our, on our
Yep.
YouTube. You can go catch up and listen to that. But Daniel, let's maybe kick off about one of the big things that's happened here recently is the President Trump's executive order. It's called basically ensuring American space superiority. But I thought maybe we could start out talk a little bit about what does that mean and what is in that presidential order that's positive for space.
I think what we've seen just generally with Trump 2.0 and this administration is a big push to make sure that the United States has all of the critical capabilities, both from an infrastructure standpoint and from a national security standpoint, um, in space. And and I think this administration has done a really good job in identifying the gaps that we have as a nation vis-a-vis our adversaries in orbit, and then filling those gaps. And a lot of that has been a direct response to the Chinese activity in space. And then a lot of it has to do with kind of where this administration would like to see our capabilities in space moving forward from a national security standpoint. A lot of that is Golden Dome, and the build out of Golden Dome. A lot of that they reference kind of like building out a permanent presence on the moon. A lot of that is power in space, through the replacement of the International Space Station. So I think the executive order at the highest level aims to kind of fill the gaps of where this administration believes we are deficient, and then really leaning into, and I think this is really novel, really leaning into the private sector and working with the private sector hand in hand, in the form of big government contracts, unique partnerships, or even investments in some points, to bring the private sector to kind of the forefront, and give them the fuel to go and bring these capabilities online. So I think that's kind of like the highest level what the executive order sort of states and aims to achieve.
So, you talk about kind of the three components there, and I kind of look at it as you got private industry, which we definitely lots of amazing names. We're going to talk more about that. And then having the government, basically on board. I mean, if you go back to the history if you look at the railways, right, the transcontinental railway, you had a partnership with private industry and government, and of course, all the regulation and the ease of regulation, all that was needed to get the investment and everything to move, the railroads. And I think that we're kind of in that impasse today. That's where we are. Trump's executive order, if you think about it, we've had the Outer Space Treaty from 1967, old law, old stuff in there. It meant a lot different things than it does mean today. So I think the executive order kind of brings, the legislation to where it should be to give, the private industry and everything else that what they need to move forward and ahead. But what are your kind of thoughts on that as far as this alignment of, private business and government, and of course the old school being NASA, that trifecta?
Yeah. I mean, it has to work hand in hand for us to be competitive on the national stage. And, we kind of talk about internally sometimes. It is the role of the government to enable the private sector. And what we've seen really over the last 5 years, and especially since we did our last podcast, the US government is really, paying for, through these public-private partnerships, the infrastructure build out of space, and are really subsidizing the infrastructure build out of space so that one day the commercial sector can come in and kind of flourish. And it's not too dissimilar to what's happened in other areas or other disruptive tech, cycles. look at the internet. DARPA invented the internet. They paid for really and subsidized the initial development and infrastructure of the internet initially as a way to move information between bases. And that enabled sort of the private sector through partnerships to go and allow us to do these, Zoom and virtual meetings that we're doing today. So I think the government plays an incredibly important role in that. But ultimately, the only way we're going to be really competitive to the Chinese, which almost has the antithesis of this model, is the private sector. If you look at back in the 2000s, the U.S. was really deficient in its launch capabilities. The Russians were much further ahead, and after we sort of abandoned our launch or had forgotten and moved away a lot of the resources from the government from our launch capabilities that were inherently within the U.S. government, we were sending NASA astronauts up to the ISS on Russian launches, and the U.S. government deemed this to be a national security risk. I mean, just imagine today if we were still relying on Russia to launch our
Yeah,
astronauts into orbit. And so
thankfully we're
what they
not.
did is, yeah, well, I think it's exactly the foresight of that administration of the time was let's issue these contracts. Let's allow for new private launch businesses to go and bid on these contracts. And the thesis was this will enable us to have a robust, competitive private launch industry. And came SpaceX, Blue Origin, United Launch Alliance, and the likes that allowed and that won these contracts, and now we have the most robust and best launch capabilities in the world. So I think this is a model that the U.S. government has used in the past, and it's really effective when we face competition at the national stage, and we see that being played out right now across the moon, space stations, propulsion, hypersonics, and all different parts of the space station.
If it wasn't for NASA having the COTS program, SpaceX probably would have never gotten to the degree of where it is today, right? And then now we got
Correct.
Starlink and all these different things. I mean, so one of the things I want to go back to that infrastructure layer because when you and I spoke over 2 years ago, I mean, the cadence was kind of it was a little bit rusty. It wasn't as frequent. We're seeing that increase today. But what else in that infrastructure layer have you seen being built, and then kind of where are we heading with the technologies that we're seeing today and some of the private sector investments?
So what we do, at Balerion, we kind of map out the value chain, and we kind of think about the opportunity set through this, different subsegments that make up the overall value chain of commercial space. So to us, it starts with transportation. So for the most part, launch vehicles and different types of launch vehicles putting stuff into orbit. What they put into orbit is primarily, communication satellites, Earth observation satellites. But now we're seeing new assets that are being put into orbit. In-space manufacturing facilities like companies like Varda, which have done an incredible job. It's kind of highlighting the importance of that asset. Private commercial space stations, and now we're hearing a lot of talk about putting data centers into orbit. So we put a lot of assets into space as a result of prices coming down in sort of a robust launch market and industry. Then we kind of see all the different components that actually make up a spacecraft. So onboard propulsion, avionics, onboard compute, the actual chassis or the spacecraft. You've seen ground-based infrastructure and space-based infrastructure, the lunar economy, and then the supply chains that kind of feed into all those. And that looks like, propellants, propulsion systems, power, and then everything on the factory floor that's needed to actually manufacture these things. So I think that's the way we view kind of like the value chain today. Since we started in our firm, we really paid a lot of attention initially to transportation and to the assets that were going to space, primarily communication and Earth observation. I think over the last 2 years, we've really seen an emergence in our focus shift towards the different components that make up a spacecraft, the power necessary for this, so a lot of nuclear, ground-based and space-based infrastructure, and now a lot of focus on the lunar economy, in due part also because of the executive order and this administration's focus on it.
Well, yeah, you bring up a lot of good things there, and remember, back to the transatlantic railways. A lot of because remember we're talking to investors. Investors are looking at space right now. They're excited about it, but then some plans are grander than others. Like when I hear about getting to Mars and getting behind a company that wants to go straight to Mars, I feel like there better be a lot of things that are making revenue because it's going to take time for that to develop, right? And I think we're starting to see a lot of these companies realize I've got to have something that generates revenue. So if you take SpaceX, for example, I mean, the Falcon 9, the launch, then that led to, Starlink. Now Starlink
That's
links to
right.
Starship. So I think all these companies have kind of figured out that value chain and how they have to graduate from one product to the other. So I think that's a huge thing that's happened since the last 2 years that we've spoke. And then you mentioned energy, and I want to ask you because we've got obviously Davos that's going
Michael,
on.
just
Yeah,
just just on that just
yeah.
on that point, I think like that shift in focus that we've had is entirely as a result of new revenues sort of emerging in those areas, and it's those companies chasing that net new revenue opportunity, and that revenue opportunity has come from this entirely new sort of paradigm of we've got to put so much more stuff into space because we need it for national security or because the market is driving it, and we do not have the supply chain online today to facilitate and meet that growth. Like Starlink and these mega constellations are breaking the supply chain that once existed in old space, and all of these emerging companies are the Andros of the world and the Northwoods of the world. They're coming online to basically fix that, and that's what we love to see.
Well, and you got today, I think it was TerraWave announced by Blue Origin. That's going to be their
That's right.
satellite constellation, right? You got Baidu, which is Chinese, their constellation, and they're supposed to be very aggressive this year in getting that. I mean, they're trying to compete with Starlink, right? I mean, that's a big
Yep.
thing. So that competition kind of it keeps driving this forward. And again, back to a matter of national security. That's why this race is really important, and it's something I think that you're going to have government continue to be behind it. But Davos is happening right now, and the big takeaway from Davos is energy. I mean, we've got artificial intelligence. Everybody's using it. It's now increased the amount of power we need massively. And what's now so interconnected is what I heard from a lot of people at Davos is space and exploration is going to be needed to find those new power sources. So I want to get your thoughts on that and kind of what you've been hearing from Davos and maybe other angles.
Yeah, power's been, a topic du jour for us over the last basically 18 months. As we think about kind of the supply chain and, power to us is at the bottom of every tech stack. In space, you don't have a grid, so you can't just plug in and get power. So it's either solar or nuclear, and we've done an extensive sort of deep dive into nuclear, and you've been to some of our events. And to us, it's an incredibly important part, not just for space, but for powering our infrastructure in national security and on the ground, and then powering the innovation that's driving a lot of this AI and data centers. So we've done we I think we've spent a lot of time thinking about power through the lens of nuclear. We've got great companies out there that have achieved some incredible milestones like Valor Atomics that just recently, went critical and split an atom. There's another company that's a company called Oklo that achieved the same sort of feat. So I think I think this talk about power and our dependency on power is really important. And what's really exciting and promising is that companies are now starting to actually deliver and achieve technical milestones that make this sort of in reach.
So wouldn't you say power is very critical? Because I think the one thing I remember at you guys had your big annual conference at Bentonville in Arkansas, which was fantastic, by the way. So thanks for that invite. But one of the things I kept hearing was we got to stop chasing and trying to keep up with what China's doing well. We got to look beyond and find other technologies and other ways to leapfrog them. Don't you think if we can achieve the power source, wouldn't that be one of them? And maybe what others would you add?
Absolutely, and I think this administration's done an incredible job issuing an executive order around nuclear, basically giving a green light and a easier path to basically try and have a working nuclear reactors online by July 4th this year. there's a handful of companies that are pursuing that effort that have been kind of selected
Hmm.
and cherry picked by this administration. And um, I think it goes back to how we started the conversation. It's the U.S. government understanding that we can't mimic the Chinese efforts because we're not the Chinese. We got to lean into our superpowers, which is the innovation ecosystem that we have in capitalism here in the United States. If the defense budget or national security dollars need to give them a nudge to get them going, so be it. But we're seeing that play out, and I think we've got the recipe, and I think it's baking in the oven right now.
Well, no, well, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I feel like every day I read something on how the United States has got this amazing new technology, a new breakthrough, but it's not a week later that I hear China has done something that sounds more grandiose and better. How much of that is probably somewhat truthful, or do you feel like some of this might just be, just context out there to try to look like they're staying ahead? And I guess maybe kind of leading that into a question, where do you feel like we are compared to China in the space race? I might throw that as the question.
Um, I think China's like an adversary that should not be taken lightly. They've got incredible resources, and they've got um, incredibly bright engineers, and they have manufacturing capabilities and control of the supply chains that make them the biggest threat that we face as a nation. With that being said, I don't think that they have the characteristics to drive net new innovation like we do. Um, and that's our superpower. The American dream, the ability to go, okay, we've got a free market here that we can go, and if you figure out a way to bring a modular nuclear reactor online, you will be rewarded to that with dollars, and that is the incentive structure that allows you to sort of win. China does not have that, and I believe so long as that holds true, we have a fighting chance. As it relates to space, China has become, our biggest competitor in space. It used to be Russia and the USSR. It's no longer true. It's China's got two nuclear powered rovers on the lunar surface. They've got their own space station. They've got satellites with specific capabilities that we don't. And frankly, that's both concerning, but also an opportunity for us to go in and back the companies and support the companies that can give us those capabilities to leapfrog the Chinese. And that's what we're seeing happen day in and day out in real time.
Well, you know what? I love the answer. Fantastic answer is what I'm hoping to hear for. It can be discouraging when you start to hear, we're getting surpassed in different areas, but I think you're absolutely right. Charlie Munger, which is Warren Buffett's famous partner, said, "Show me the incentives and I show you the results." And you're
That's right.
absolutely right. I mean, Xi Jinping, president of China, he is now trying to look like, well, we welcome innovation. We want these entrepreneurs. Let us be the country that helps get behind you. But they've been long the country that has been the complete opposite. So trying to build that now takes a long time. Now, I wouldn't take it for granted. I mean, I think they could achieve that pretty soon. But our innovators, I mean, at one of your space meetups, I mean, I'm talking to people that worked with NASA, that worked on projects to see them get canceled end over end, never had any type of just gratification of what they're working on. They've now started their own companies. They now have an innovation. It's past a prototype. They've got capital seed, A and B series already going on. They've got money moving. And then they've got, like I said earlier, the administration, the industry, and then, of course, I guess the incentive, which is the competition with China, everything to basically push the one thing we have better than any country in the world is our entrepreneurs and our innovative spirit and our way of life. And I think that is such a huge driver for where and why we stay ahead. And so I'm glad to
100%.
hear you say that. But
And
what?
Michael, there's never been a better time for that. I don't
Agreed.
think. I think we are living in a golden era of opportunity in America. If you got a solution to a problem that's connected to our national security efforts, there's no better time as an entrepreneur to go build that and win and get rewarded for it.
No, I agree. Well, we can roll the U.S. flag here and play the music. I think we're both excited. I think this is probably. I mean, in my career, This is probably one of the most exciting things I've ever seen. This expansion of space. I was a little kid, and living near NASA, dreaming about it, and all of it, science fiction is coming to fruition, and so it's amazing. But you mentioned, I think, a big thing here, and it's talking about the defense, right? And we've all heard about Golden Dome. Maybe kind of give us a little bit of an update on how is that looking? What are maybe some things we should look for in 2026 for that to be successful? And what else are you hearing?
Yeah, a lot of talk about Golden Dome over the last year, and I think a lot of exciting stuff. Golden Dome is a proposed for the listeners that don't fully know what it is. Golden Dome is a proposed space-based and ground-based missile defense system that can and should, in theory, um, be able to eliminate any ballistic threats we face from our adversaries. And how this kind of looks is what's gone on over the last year is the U.S. government has basically called for um, a, the majority of the industry to come together and basically um, put heads together and put a proposed architecture on what the capabilities we currently have, what capabilities we think we can have, and how do we design an architecture to achieve that end goal. And through a lot of back and forth, through different industry days and conversations with the team within the U.S. government and the teams that make up the groups that will ultimately build and architect Golden Dome, we have generally an idea of what it should look like. And it looks like, up to a couple thousand satellites in space, the majority of them doing threat detection, so identifying potential threats from our adversaries. In practicality, that could be identifying a heat signature from a known ICBM launch site from places like North Korea, and then having um, you know, space-based interceptors sitting right next to it to be able to eliminate that threat before it ever takes off, intercept that threat in space or in our atmosphere. In addition to that, we'd complement the space-based interceptors with ground-based interceptors that we already have in places like near the Arctic, where our adversaries are nearest. Um, and so that's the general idea and proposed architecture. What we're seeing right now is, um, you know, early conversations and early contracts potentially being awarded to um, key providers of parts of this architecture. And I think we should see a lot more in 26 and potentially the beginning of the infrastructure build out of Golden Dome take place in 26.
Okay, no, that's definitely good stuff to hear. And I've got two more questions, and then I'll let you get back to doing what you got to do there. But some big breakthrough technologies. I think everybody has heard about it. I think there's a lot of confusion about it, but maybe just kind of tell us a little bit about space data centers. Where do you see that as far as this year? Where's that going? Maybe kind of explain what is the advantage of that. I think that's one of the things we talked about that we could leapfrog China. Let me get your take on that.
Yeah, a lot of good conversations about space-based data centers. I think the general theory here is, we don't have enough power on Earth to be able to to power the demand needed to um, basically achieve what we try and achieve in AI through the data center. So we need more power. Um, Space as an environment provides a unique place to solve and complement the what we're trying to achieve on Earth. And space and environment is really attractive because you have a almost limitless supply of energy from the sun. So the energy we get from the sun through solar here on Earth gets diluted pretty dramatically because of weather, the atmosphere, and sort of day and night. That doesn't happen in space. And so you've got this incredibly vast space where you've got a ton of energy from the sun. You don't need to buy land. You can move things a lot easier in a microgravity environment. Um, and so that's why space has been sort of thought of as a great place to do things like data centers for a while. Now with launch costs and prices having come down and potentially orders of magnitude more with Starship coming online, and other Starship-like launch vehicles. You can start thinking of potentially actually putting these massive, solar, football field-sized solar arrays in space that would harness energy. You'd use that energy to go power data centers, and that's sort of the proposal. I'd say it's not without its limitations and technical challenges, which I think are being flushed out in kind of real time by a lot of these companies, dealing with heat transfer properties that are a lot different, dealing with launching all of these solar panels and actually assembling them in orbit. But I think there's a lot to be excited about. It's something that's a category we're paying a lot of attention to. I'll plug in that we've done a research report on it, and you can find it on our Substack. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be excited about. It's still relatively early days. I think that the big constraint is getting all this stuff into space at a reasonable cost.
Well, speaking of getting stuff into space, let's talk about what your thoughts are on SpaceX IPO. What does that mean for the entire industry? Is it the tide that lifts all boats like it did in the first wave? Or is there any other thoughts behind that?
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly exciting opportunity for the industry as a whole. I mean, not only is this the biggest company in the category, it will become one of the biggest companies in the world.
Yes.
And so I think the coverage it will receive, I think there's a lot of smart people out there that haven't been paying attention to this asset class for a while, that will now be paying attention to it. I think it'll hopefully bring a lot more capital into the category, which will make it a lot more accessible for companies to go in and start and bring these capabilities online. So I think it'll be very good for the industry.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Well, Daniel, I could keep you on here all day, but I won't do that to you. And I appreciate your time. Great conversation. And I know you've agreed to come back a couple times this year and keep us updated. So I can't wait to see where we're going. It seems like we're moving light speed, and I can't wait till the next time we have a conversation to see where we are. So
I
thanks for coming
appreciate
on.
it every time. You guys are the best. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, man. All right, you take care.